Most people think of a glass of wine as harmless. After all, it's even been praised as heart healthy. But after 65, that same glass doesn't act the way it once did. With age, lean muscle decreases, body water drops, and the liver clears alcohol more slowly. That means alcohol hangs around longer, raising blood levels higher from the same amount. Many health authorities now recommend lower limits for older adults for this very reason. This isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. In this video, you'll see the clear signs to watch for, how alcohol mixes with common medications, and simple swaps that protect your health without sacrificing social life. And it all starts with understanding why one drink after 65 can feel so different from the one you remember. Why the same drink hits harder after 65. Here's the simple truth. Alcohol may be the same substance, but the body you bring to it after 65 makes the experience entirely different. A single drink now has more impact than it used to, and the reasons are rooted in clear biological changes that come with age. First, older adults carry less body water and lower lean mass compared to their younger years, because alcohol distributes into water rather than fat. Less total water means that the same glass produces a higher concentration of alcohol in the bloodstream. The drink hasn't grown stronger, but your body has become less equipped to dilute it. Second, liver metabolism slows with age. The organ that once processed alcohol relatively efficiently now works at a slower pace, so the ethanol remains in circulation longer. Instead of clearing between dinner and bedtime, one glass can linger into the night, raising the risk of unexpected impairment long after you've stopped drinking. Third, the brain and body grow more sensitive to alcohol's effects with each decade. Nerve signaling slows, balance becomes more fragile, and cognitive performance is more easily disrupted. That means the same mild buzz you shrugged off in middle age can now interfere with walking, driving, and even thinking clearly in ways that feel disproportionate to the amount consumed. Put together, these mechanisms explain why one familiar glass can feel unfamiliar now. A younger version of you might have needed several drinks before losing coordination, but later in life, even moderate intake can produce a noticeable change. Think of it this way. A single serving of beer or wine that once meant light relaxation may now feel closer to a hangover in motion. This shift is not evidence of weakness. It's physiology. The reduced water in the body concentrates alcohol. The slowed liver keeps it present for longer, and the more vulnerable nervous system amplifies its impact. Every one of these changes works in the same direction, toward greater impairment from less alcohol. That's why old assumptions about tolerance can't be trusted. The "I know my limits" mindset doesn't align with the biology of aging, because the limit itself has moved. What used to be safe on a Friday night in your 40s may not be safe in your 70s under the same circumstances. The takeaway is practical. If you still enjoy drinking, recognize that moderation looks different with age. Don't assume past patterns apply now. If you take medication or live with chronic conditions, the safest course is to check with your doctor or pharmacist about what amount, if any, is reasonable. And while feeling tipsy sooner may sound like a minor inconvenience, the consequences go further than the buzz itself. Subtle balance issues, slower reflexes, and impaired judgment feed directly into risks most older adults already worry about. That connection is what we need to look at next. The fall risk nobody talks about. Most older adults tend to worry more about broken hips than about hangovers. Yet alcohol quietly connects the two in ways that often go unnoticed. For people over 65, the glass that seems small and harmless often carries a hidden cost. Alcohol works against already changing bodies, dulling reflexes, impairing coordination, and reducing stability in situations that once felt routine. What feels like light relaxation can in practice shift balance just enough to make a sudden fall far more likely. The reality is straightforward. Aging naturally reduces muscle strength, slows reaction time, and can limit vision. Alcohol adds another layer by interfering with the brain's ability to send and process signals quickly. The result is slower corrections when the body wobbles or missteps. Even ordinary actions, walking across a carpet, stepping off a curb, or moving through a familiar hallway, become riskier when alcohol delays that tiny but critical reaction window. For older adults, the difference of a split second is often the difference between steady footing and a serious fall. The consequences of those falls go far beyond bruises. When younger adults trip, recovery is usually quick and uncomplicated. In older age, however, reduced bone strength and slower healing make the outcomes dramatically different. A fall that might once have meant a sore wrist could now mean a fracture that requires hospitalization and a long rehabilitation. Hip fractures, in particular, carry some of the most severe consequences, frequently leading to months of recovery, reduced mobility, and a heightened risk of losing independence. For many, the injury is not just a physical setback. It shifts daily routines, confidence, and entire living arrangements. Illustrating this is not difficult because examples are everywhere. Imagine a man at a community gathering who insists he's still light on his feet after a few drinks. The music makes him bold enough to prove it, yet one misplaced step combined with dulled reflexes leaves him on the ground, not laughing but injured. Though the details change, the pattern repeats across countless similar scenarios. The cheerful environment, the casual confidence, the belief that just a couple isn't an issue, all unravel quickly when the body doesn't respond the way it once did. Hard numbers confirm what these stories suggest. Emergency department data clearly shows a rise in alcohol-related fall injuries among older adults. One national study found that between 2011 and 2019, alcohol-associated fall visits to the emergency room for people over 65 increased by an average of about 7.5% per year. That steady climb is not the result of rare extremes or binge drinking. In many cases, it begins with a single glass. What to one person feels like only a gentle buzz is clinically enough to increase the likelihood of a sudden trip that ends in a fracture and an ER visit. Equally important is the way biology stacks the odds. As bones lose density, especially in women more prone to osteoporosis, even moderate impacts become harder to withstand. Pair fragile bones with weaker muscles that can no longer cushion a fall and add alcohol's interference with balance, and the likelihood of a serious injury rises dramatically. Once a fracture occurs, recovery takes longer than it used to, and many never fully regain the autonomy they had before the accident. For older adults, independence is often measured in their ability to walk unassisted, shop for themselves, or navigate stairs. All of that can change in one miscalculated step. This is why the risks tied to alcohol and falling are often more devastating than the hangover we typically associate with drinking. The real cost is not measured in a few hours of discomfort, but in months of rehabilitation, loss of confidence, and dependency on others. Families adjust schedules to help, social lives shrink, and daily freedom erodes. The trade-off between a brief drink and lasting consequences becomes uncomfortably clear. Avoiding that trade-off doesn't necessarily mean abandoning alcohol altogether, but it does mean approaching it with awareness. A single practical shift makes a difference. Avoid drinking before tasks that demand balance, such as walking outdoors, climbing stairs, or moving at night in low light. Most importantly, never mix alcohol with common nighttime sedatives or diuretics, which already increase nighttime bathroom trips and dizziness. If alcohol is a regular part of life, it is worth asking a doctor or pharmacist about personal fall risk mitigation strategies. Small proactive steps can save enormous setbacks later. The sobering truth is that alcohol's effect as a fall risk multiplier often outweighs its value as a moment of comfort. The drink itself may not be the hazard. It's the stumble that follows in the quietest, most ordinary moments, on familiar staircases in well-lit kitchens, within the very routines where seniors expect safety. For older adults, the most life-altering dangers do not appear in bars or crowded parties, but in the living rooms and hallways of their own homes. And yet, alcohol's risks don't end with balance and bone. The body in later years navigates more than muscle strength and coordination. It manages a full schedule of prescriptions that many rely on every day. When alcohol collides with those medications, it doesn't just magnify fall risks. It can completely change how the body responds in ways far more dangerous than most people realize. When alcohol and medications collide, what happens when that evening drink enters a body already managing a lineup of prescriptions? For many older adults, it's not just mixing alcohol with food, it's mixing it with medicine. And when alcohol collides with medications, the results can be far less predictable than most expect. By the late 60s, most people take at least one prescribed drug every day, and many take several. In fact, research shows that a very large majority of adults over 65 rely on medications regularly, and about 80% take at least one drug that has the potential to interact with alcohol. These aren't occasional extras. They're daily tools for keeping blood pressure under control, protecting the heart, managing blood sugar, or easing pain. The body adjusts to that routine carefully. Once alcohol enters, it can disrupt how those drugs are absorbed, broken down, or eliminated. The problem doesn't lie in whether a person is responsible with drinking. Even small amounts of alcohol interact in ways that make certain medications more potent, less predictable, or flat-out dangerous. Think of this not as casual sipping added onto a pill regimen, but as two sets of chemicals colliding inside one body. To make it clear, here are the major drug groups where caution is most critical. First, sedatives such as benzodiazepines and the so-called Z drugs, often prescribed for anxiety or sleep. Alcohol shares the same sedative pathways in the nervous system. Taken together, these combine into stronger than expected drowsiness, loss of balance, memory problems, and even slowed breathing at night. The practical step: if you use these medications, ask your prescriber directly whether even occasional alcohol is safe. For many, the risks outweigh the momentary relaxation. Second, opioids prescribed for pain. On their own, they already suppress breathing and dull alertness. Alcohol amplifies those effects, making accidental overdose or dangerously slowed respiration far more likely. This isn't about heavy drinking. Even a couple of drinks with an opioid in the system can be enough to tip into severe risk. The action point: never assume just one drink is safe if you're using opioids. Consult your clinician first. Third, anticoagulants such as warfarin or newer blood thinners. These medications prevent clots that could cause strokes or heart attacks. But alcohol thins blood on its own. Together, they can magnify bleeding risk to the point where even a small fall or minor bruise leads to excessive bleeding that is difficult to stop. The safest approach: if you're on a blood thinner, bring up alcohol use at your next appointment and ask flatly whether any amount is safe for you. Fourth, common pain relievers and over-the-counter drugs like acetaminophen and NSAIDs. Alcohol competes in the liver with acetaminophen and taxes liver pathways already working hard. Combined, they raise the risk of serious liver injury. NSAIDs, such as ibuprofen, bring another hazard. Alcohol irritates the stomach lining, and together with NSAIDs, they can trigger internal bleeding in the digestive tract. The practical move here: if you drink at all, avoid mixing those moments with pain relievers. And if regular pain medication is part of your routine, confirm with your pharmacist what's safe. Fifth, medications for diabetes and high blood pressure. Alcohol lowers blood sugar on its own and can mask early signs of hypoglycemia like shakes or dizziness. Pair that with insulin or other glucose-lowering drugs, and blood sugar can plummet dangerously low without warning. for blood pressure drugs. Alcohol sometimes amplifies their effect, driving blood pressure too low and triggering faintness or sudden collapse. The step here is simple. Sync your alcohol questions with your primary care provider, especially if you take pills morning and evening, because timing matters as much as dosage. These core categories cover the vast majority of dangerous overlaps for seniors. They illustrate how different parts of the body, brain, liver, circulatory system, metabolism can all be undermined by alcohol's interference. And the risks are not uniform. Even within one person, the interaction might feel mild on Monday and severe on Thursday. What looks like random inconsistency is really how unpredictable chemical overlap plays out in a body that clears alcohol more slowly with age. Over-the-counter medications complicate things further. Cold and allergy products often contain antihistamines or cough suppressants that already make people feel drowsy. Add alcohol, and those drowsy effects multiply. Meanwhile, the liver processes many of these drugs through the same pathways that ethanol uses, meaning both substances compete. That competition increases the likelihood of side effects and weakens the body's ability to clear either one efficiently. So even medicines people consider harmless in small doses shouldn't automatically be assumed safe with a drink. This is why no blanket rule works for everyone. Some clinicians might approve small, occasional alcohol use for certain patients if medications are stable and risks are low. In other cases, even half a beer is unsafe. Drugs used for treating alcohol use disorder itself, like naltrexone or acamprosate, require case-by-case judgment too, especially for older adults. For patients on alternatives such as buprenorphine, the guidance is the same. Don't assume safety. Ask a professional to weigh risks and benefits for your specific situation. The larger truth here is that alcohol's impact in later life doesn't come from the drink alone. It comes from the system it enters, a body whose metabolism has slowed and whose health depends on medications that interact in countless ways. Independence and daily stability often rest on those pills working exactly as intended. Alcohol doesn't respect those careful balances. For older adults, that means the risk is less about too much drinking and more about any amount combined with the wrong medication. So if there's one action step to take seriously, it's this. Make a full list of every prescription, supplement, and over-the-counter medicine you use. Bring that list to your next appointment. Then sit down with your doctor or pharmacist and ask plainly, is any amount of alcohol safe with these? That single question takes abstract fears and turns them into clear, personal guidance. Because while the body may warn you with dizziness or sedation, not all risks announce themselves. Some creep in quietly, and their earliest signs are harder to blame on alcohol. And that builds toward an even subtler problem, what alcohol can do to the aging brain itself, often before anyone connects the dots. Silent stress on the aging brain. For older adults, one of the least visible impacts of alcohol isn't on the liver or the bones, it's on the brain. This is the silent stress few people talk about, the way alcohol quietly accelerates the very changes aging brains are already experiencing. While a stumble on the stairs is obvious, the toll on memory, learning, and mental flexibility unfolds slowly, often unnoticed until it has already progressed. The first key point is brain atrophy. As people age, brain volume naturally decreases, and neurons are lost at a slow pace. On its own, this happens gradually, showing up in harmless ways like taking longer to recall a name or needing extra time to adapt to new technology. Alcohol doesn't cause that process, but it does speed it up. Brain imaging studies consistently show faster shrinkage in areas tied to memory and decision-making, particularly the hippocampus, when alcohol is part of an older adult's routine. Even modest, steady intake can raise the long-term risk of cognitive decline, and unlike sore muscles or bruised skin, The brain does not regenerate what it loses. The second critical factor is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and adapt over time. This flexibility is what allows older adults to continue learning, recover from setbacks, and build resilience after stressful events. Alcohol interferes with that process, creating rigidity where adaptability should be. For an older person, reduced neuroplasticity means slower recovery from health events like a minor stroke, greater difficulty learning new skills, and less resilience in handling daily stress. The difference isn't obvious after one night of drinking, but with repetition, the brain becomes less responsive to challenges and repairs itself less effectively. Taken together, these changes mean that consistent alcohol use, even in moderate amounts, can make the aging brain more vulnerable. Physicians who track long-term patterns see it confirmed in practical terms. Seniors who drink regularly often experience subtle forgetfulness that evolves into more pronounced impairment sooner than peers who don't. Multiple research studies link later life alcohol use with a higher risk of cognitive decline and dementia. It doesn't require heavy drinking to raise that risk. What matters most is the steady, long-term exposure. The risk is not spread evenly either. Older women are more sensitive to alcohol's brain effects than men of the same age. Women naturally carry less body water than men, which means alcohol reaches higher concentrations in their bloodstreams. Combined with slower metabolism and the same age-related brain changes, the result is a stronger impact from the same drink. Studies consistently show steeper declines in cognitive performance among older women who drink compared to older men. What might feel like equal social participation, sharing a glass of wine at dinner, actually delivers a heavier biological burden for women. Here's a brief example to bring the science into focus. Imagine two friends, both in their 70s, meeting once a week to share drinks and conversation. One begins noticing names slip away more often, while the other seems to recall details with less trouble. While there could be many reasons, research suggests alcohol intake is one factor that makes decline uneven. The brain that receives weekly alcohol faces a steeper climb in preserving sharp memory than the one that doesn't. Despite how serious these patterns sound, the takeaway isn't that a single drink will erase memory. Instead, the message is probability. Regular alcohol use increases the likelihood of faster decline, not certainty, but risk, because the brain is central to independence. Even small increases in risk carry weight. Conversations, daily planning, and the ability to live without constant assistance all rely on maintaining cognitive clarity. So what can be done? One practical step is simple. If memory concerns already exist, take alcohol off the list for now and discuss them with a clinician. Ask about a basic cognitive screening to establish a clear baseline. That small act makes any future changes easier to spot and easier to manage. For those without current issues, even reducing frequency has benefits, giving the brain more time to repair and adapt in its natural rhythm without the silent pressure alcohol applies. It's also useful to recognize that alcohol's effects on memory and adaptability are cumulative. A single night may be harmless, but repetition lays the groundwork for gradual stress that builds over years. That's what makes the damage harder to notice in daily life, until the memory slips start stacking up. Alcohol doesn't announce itself in the brain with immediate loss. It chips away slowly, often disguised as normal aging. Being able to tell the difference and to adjust habits early is one way older adults can protect the years of mental clarity they still want to enjoy. One more caution: alcohol affects memory indirectly by disrupting other systems the brain depends on. For instance, memory consolidation happens most during deep and REM sleep. If alcohol weakens those stages of rest, the brain has fewer opportunities to store and strengthen memories. Over time, it isn't just cell shrinkage or reduced plasticity at play. It's the combination of direct stress plus the loss of critical recovery time. That creates a 1-2 effect. increasing the risk of decline all the faster. The main point is balance. Older adults don't need to fear every sip, but they do need to weigh it differently than they did in their 30s or 40s. Alcohol's relationship with the brain is not directionless. It consistently trends toward extra strain during a time when the brain is already less resilient. Moderation or abstinence at this stage isn't about discipline so much as protecting clarity for as long as possible. Each choice adds up. Another drink may mean another small step away from sharpness, while choosing to skip it may mean preserving a skill or memory longer into the future. Protecting the brain ultimately makes life more enjoyable, not less. The ability to recall faces, navigate routines, and keep independence often matters more in older age than temporary relaxation after a drink. For that reason, swapping alcohol for other forms of stress relief, like a short evening walk, a warm cup of tea, or light reading, isn't about denial. It's about keeping the foundation of independence steady. And yet there's another layer here that can't be ignored. Beyond memory, focus, and adaptability, alcohol also affects the brain through something many people mistake as harmless sleep. It creates the illusion of rest while undermining the very cycles that allow the brain to restore itself each night. That hidden disruption forms the next piece of the story, the sleep saboteur. Think that nightcap is the answer to restless nights? The idea is one of the most common myths around sleep. For older adults, where insomnia and nighttime waking are already common, it can feel tempting to rely on alcohol to calm the mind. But what looks like help falling asleep often undermines the very stages of rest that matter most. In fact, research shows that even moderate drinking, roughly 2 standard drinks, about 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, reduces REM sleep, and higher doses shorten the time it takes to doze off, but leave REM even more disrupted later in the night. This means the sleep after a drink is not restorative. It's lighter, more fragmented, and less sustaining. The difference is subtle but significant. Alcohol slows down brain activity, so falling asleep feels quicker, lulling people into believing it has solved the problem. But sleep is not measured by speed of onset. It's built on cycles of depth and rhythm. The brain is meant to move through slow-wave sleep for physical repair and REM sleep for memory and emotional regulation. Alcohol carves into these cycles. REM periods shorten and scatter, leaving the body feeling unrefreshed, even when the total hours in bed seem adequate. Fragmentation is the second part of the trap. Instead of sleeping straight through the night, older adults who drink often wake suddenly, find themselves restless in the dark, and struggle to drift back into a deeper state. The interruptions reset the sleep cycle repeatedly, leaving the brain unable to complete restorative work. The effect only grows worse over time, as consistent disruption teaches the body to expect broken nights. The result is 7 or 8 hours in bed that function more like 4 or 5 true hours of sleep. Another mechanism at play is alcohol's effect on the internal clock, the circadian rhythm. This clock in the brain dictates the timing of energy, alertness, hormone release, digestion, and immune activity. Alcohol moves these rhythms out of sync, causing wakefulness at odd hours and sluggishness when the morning should bring clarity. People describe this as bad luck with sleep timing, but it's often directly tied to evening drinking habits. Then there's the diuretic effect. Alcohol forces the kidneys to flush fluids at a faster rate than usual. For older adults who already face frequent nighttime bathroom trips from medication or smaller bladder capacity, this push heightens the problem. Instead of allowing long stretches of uninterrupted sleep, the bladder demands attention, pulling the brain from deeper stages of rest over and over. What feels like mild inconvenience compounds into chronic fatigue when repeated nightly. Consider a simple example. After dinner, someone pours a glass of wine. Relaxation comes quickly, their eyelids grow heavy, and they fall asleep earlier than usual. but come 2 or 3 a.m., sleep shatters into wakefulness. For the next hour, they lie in bed, tossing and turning. The cycle might repeat again before sunrise. On paper, the person got 7 hours of sleep. In reality, the quality made it equivalent to far less, leaving them groggy, foggy, and short on energy. The bedtime ritual they trust is quietly making mornings harder. Studies reinforce what plays out in real life. Older adults who drink before sleep show reduced sleep efficiency. The percentage of time actually spent asleep compared to hours in bed. They lose the restorative layers of slow wave and REM stages, the very phases that sweep toxins from the brain, strengthen memory, and build resilience. In this way, alcohol erases part of the body's overnight self-repair system. What is lost in the short term is next-day energy. What is lost in the long term is physical strength, mental stability, and immunity against illness. The consequences ripple outward. A weakened immune system means longer recovery from infections and more frequent sickness. Emotional health suffers. Fragmented sleep is tied to higher rates of irritability, depressive symptoms, and difficulty regulating stress. Cognitive performance drops as concentration and memory decline after nights of poor rest. The irony is bitter. Many older adults turn to alcohol precisely because they cannot sleep, yet this choice fuels the very insomnia and fatigue they were trying to solve. Sleep quality also determines physical safety. Without consistent deep rest, muscle repair lags, reflexes slow, and balance becomes unsteady, raising the chance of serious falls. Fatigue saps motivation to exercise or to socialize, both of which sustain independence. Even medications and nutrition deliver less benefit in a body short on restorative sleep. For seniors, rest is not simply comfort, it's a core requirement of survival, linking directly to strength, clarity, and independence. Alcohol, therefore, undermines health in double measure, by disrupting sleep itself and by stealing the benefits sleep should provide. The fatigue that builds carries beyond private discomfort. It reaches into daily life, influencing mobility, interactions, medical outcomes, and overall well-being. Each night of shallow rest accumulates into weeks and months of compounded loss. And few associate it with that helpful bedtime drink. It's crucial to separate what alcohol appears to do from what it truly does. Yes, it produces drowsiness and faster sleep onset. But drowsiness is not rest. True rest is measured in cycles completed, not minutes until eye closure. The same bedtime ritual that feels soothing is often trading away clarity, resilience, and stability in the days that follow. For anyone over 65, prioritizing real, restorative sleep is non-negotiable. Research continually confirms its benefits to memory, immune function, and emotional balance. Alcohol not only fails to support that, it reverses it. What may feel like a comforting tradition is a slow drain on one of the last strong pillars of independence. The practical solutions are straightforward. Avoid alcohol as a sleep aid, since its apparent benefit is misleading. Instead, small, safer alternatives have evidence behind them. Herbal teas like chamomile can calm the body without fragmenting sleep cycles. Tart cherry juice, a natural source of melatonin, has shown some promise in improving sleep quality for older adults. In some cases, doctors may approve low-dose melatonin supplements, but only after reviewing medications and health conditions to prevent interactions. Most importantly, if insomnia continues despite good routines, the next step should be to discuss it with a clinician. Professional support can address the root causes without creating new risks. Sleep may feel like a private battle, but its consequences reach far beyond bedtime. Physical health, memory, mood, and independence all rest on the quality of those nightly hours. Alcohol introduces hidden gaps into that foundation, leaving cracks where restoration should stand. By choosing alternatives, Seniors give themselves back what a drink at night claims to offer, but never truly delivers. And while this nightly disruption is critical to understand, it also connects directly to another core system in later life. Sleep supports not only the brain, but the body's physical framework. When that framework weakens, the risks multiply far beyond fatigue. Bones break easier than habits. Bones may not get as much attention as the heart or brain, but for older adults, their strength often determines how long independence lasts. That's why calcium supplements, fortified foods, and bone density checks are routine recommendations past 65. Yet alcohol quietly works against those efforts. Even in modest amounts, it reduces calcium absorption in the gut, suppresses osteoblasts, the cells that build new bone, while speeding up osteoclasts, which break bone down. The end result is thinner, weaker bones that are less able to withstand the everyday stresses of aging. This imbalance feeds directly into osteoporosis, a condition already common in seniors. For women past menopause, where protective hormone levels decline, alcohol accelerates the drop in bone mineral density. For men, the process is slower but still measurable. Over time, what might have been harmless bumps or stumbles shift into fracture-level events. A hip, wrist, or spine compressed under minor strain becomes more likely not because the accident itself was severe, but because the structural foundation was already compromised. Fractures are more than injuries. They are turning points. Seniors who experience major fractures often face reduced mobility, permanent pain, and extended rehabilitation. What started as a small slip in the kitchen or a misplaced step in the garden can spiral into weeks or months of dependence on others. While younger adults recover much faster, seniors often do not fully regain the function they had before. For many, bones mark the line between living independently and requiring ongoing support. To understand why, consider how fragile bones amplify what would otherwise be routine. Imagine a 70-year-old pouring a glass of wine each night. There is no obvious warning, no aching bones or visible cracks. Yet the slow erosion is steady. Then during a casual walk, a stumble on the curb turns into a fractured wrist. The injury itself is painful, but the larger cost is time spent out of routine. Less activity, less social interaction, and a greater reliance on others for tasks once simple. The fracture becomes a doorway not just to medical treatment, but to reduced freedom. This isn't speculation. It's reflected in medical data. Comparative bone density scans demonstrate that older adults who drink consistently score lower on hip and spine measurements than their peers who avoid alcohol. Over time, those reduced scores translate into higher fracture rates, especially in the areas most essential for balance and independence. Hospitals report patterns of alcohol-related fractures that rarely stem from reckless drinking. More often, they come from the combination of moderate drinking with age-weakened bones. The outcomes are predictable: more compression fractures in the spine, more hip fractures, and injuries that require not only surgery but often long-term rehabilitation. And fractures carry more than immediate pain. A broken hip or spine alters the trajectory of life in ways hard to reverse. Bed rest prompts muscle loss, weakness fuels more falls, and recovery stretches far longer than expected. Independence can narrow permanently. For seniors, it is an exaggeration to say that whether or not bones stay strong often decides whether they can continue living on their own. Alcohol doesn't guarantee breaks, but it makes them both more likely and more difficult to recover from. Against this backdrop, one practical step becomes vital: talking with a clinician about bone strength. A bone density scan, called a DEXA scan, offers a clear snapshot of risk. For older adults who drink regularly, it provides crucial feedback on whether additional support is needed. Supplementing with calcium and vitamin D, as advised by healthcare professionals, can help counter some of alcohol's effects. But without screening, many seniors underestimate how fragile their bones may already be. It's also worth remembering that the dangers don't come solely from weakened skeletons. Alcohol simultaneously raises the likelihood of falls, stacking risk on risk. Reflexes slow, balance strays, and vision grows less reliable, all while bones thin. The combination is uniquely dangerous. For an older adult, a stumble isn't just a fall, it's a fracture waiting to happen. Alcohol increases both sides of the equation, tilting the odds toward outcomes that once seemed unlikely. For families, too, these incidents ripple outward. A single fracture changes not just the injured person's life, but also the routines of those around them. Time is spent on doctor visits, daily chores shift onto others, and independence that once defined the older adult begins to ebb away. That shared reality is why prevention matters. Protecting bones isn't abstract science, it's preparation for maintaining quality of life. Which brings us back to the central message. Bones matter more than many realize, and habits like drinking directly undermine them. Each glass adds subtle stress to a structure already under pressure from time, hormones, and reduced repair. Independence depends on preventing that erosion, not ignoring it. Screening, nutrition, and careful choices give seniors a way to hold on to strength when it might otherwise fade unnoticed. For anyone over 65, the decision is personal, but the principle is universal. Bones break easier than habits. And when they do, they rarely heal the same. A fall that once meant a bruise now means surgery, therapy, and often permanent limits. If you've had even one fall, or if drinking is part of your routine, ask your doctor about a bone density scan. That simple step can determine how strong your foundation still is and how much you can do to keep it. Loss of bone strength shows how alcohol quietly erodes the body's defenses. But the skeleton isn't the only system left exposed. The same hidden weakening plays out in another way, leaving older adults less able to fight off the colds, flus, and infections that circulate in everyday life. The immune system weak point, one of the less obvious consequences of drinking in later life, shows up in the body's ability to defend itself. The immune system, which once responded quickly to invaders, becomes less efficient with age, a change often called immunosenescence. White blood cells don't multiply as fast, signals take longer to travel, and inflammation responses are less precise. Layer alcohol into that equation, and the defenses weaken further. Alcohol reduces immune cell activity, making it harder to detect and attack viruses or bacteria, and it disrupts the chemical signals needed to coordinate a strong response. The result is a system that's slower, less organized, and more vulnerable to everyday illnesses. For seniors, the effects are cumulative. An immune system already in decline becomes easier for germs to bypass. That means colds, flus, and other infections hit more often and last longer. Some notice it only as extra fatigue that lingers or a cough that won't disappear. What's happening underneath, though, is that alcohol is tipping the balance away from recovery. Each drink further suppresses white blood cells, interfering with the very tools the body relies on to heal itself. Over weeks and months, that suppression adds up, creating windows of weakness that are hard to recover from. The evidence is not just theoretical. Studies consistently show that alcohol lowers levels of key immune cells and slows the rate at which they multiply in older adults compared to those who don't drink. Inflammation markers become irregular, which means the body sends weak responses. At times, it should be strong and overreacts to small triggers when calm would be better. For the person living with these changes, it shows up not as dramatic crises, but as everyday setbacks, a minor sinus infection that drags into weeks, or repeated colds that pull energy away from social activities and exercise. This weakened state matters most during predictable high-risk times. Winter flu seasons, moments of high stress, and most visibly, the need for vaccines. Alcohol use around the time of receiving vaccines has been shown to blunt the body's ability to mount a full immune response. The practical step is straightforward. If you have a vaccine scheduled, or you feel a cold or flu starting, it's wise to suspend alcohol for those days and confirm with your clinician. That pause allows the body to gather its resources without interference. Planning around these moments may feel small, but it can make the difference between a vaccine working at its full strength and one that leaves immunity weaker than expected. Recovery speed is also central here. When younger, the body could take a hit from a virus and bounce back within days. For seniors, the bounce is slower, and alcohol slows it more. This isn't only about feeling sick longer. Recovery time eats directly into independence. If what would have been 2 days in bed turns into a full week, that's 5 additional days away from walking, household chores, or social outings. Over the course of a year, those extra sick days accumulate into weeks of lost participation in daily life. And since physical activity and social engagement are themselves protective against further decline, each prolonged illness leaves the person weaker, not just for that moment, but for the weeks that follow. Nutrition ties tightly into this loop. Older adults already take in fewer calories and often fewer nutrients. Appetite weakens, digestion slows, and chewing can be more difficult. Alcohol crowds nutrients further out of the diet, blocks absorption of vitamins and minerals like zinc, vitamin D, and vitamin C, and replaces nutrient-dense calories with empty energy. These specific vitamins and minerals are essential for building antibodies and sustaining strong immune function. The unintended trade happens quietly. A glass of wine displaces the nutrients that might have helped resist infection the following month. For bodies already running on limited reserves, that extra gap can mean the difference between staying healthy or falling ill. The important thing is that none of these declines announce themselves clearly. You don't wake up one morning and feel your immune system weak. You notice it only through outcomes. Illnesses last longer, sickness spreads more easily, and getting back to normal feels harder with each year. Alcohol doesn't create these patterns on its own, but it magnifies them, widening the cracks that aging has already opened. Each cold that drags on is not only an annoyance, it's a signpost of resilience fading. Ignoring the contribution of alcohol makes it harder to keep that resilience intact. For seniors, this dimension of health feeds directly into independence. The ability to remain in one's home, handle daily routines, and engage with friends often depends more on staying healthy than on avoiding injury. Alcohol's effect on immunity chips at that independence in subtle but consistent ways. Every extended illness is time not spent exercising, preparing meals, or maintaining the confidence of self-care. Over seasons and years, that quiet erosion can create dependence as surely as a fall or a fracture would. The choices here aren't extreme. This is not about complete abstinence for everyone, nor is it about alarm over a single occasional drink. What matters is recognizing that moderation has a different meaning for older adults than it did earlier in life. Small changes, such as pausing alcohol in the week of a vaccination, skipping drinks during illness, or cutting back overall frequency, have measurable effects on infection risk. Those changes add up to stronger protection, faster recovery, and more consistent energy. In later years, that kind of consistency often matters more than any single treatment or supplement. There is also real value in discussing alcohol use specifically with clinicians during routine check-ups. Many older adults focus on medications, nutrition, or fitness while leaving drinking habits unmentioned. But a simple conversation like, "Does drinking affect my ability to fight infections?" can draw out advice tailored to medication use, vaccination needs, and overall health status. For many, the response includes reassurance that small reductions can make meaningful improvements. Without the conversation, though, those connections remain hidden and opportunities to strengthen immunity are missed. Thinking of alcohol in this light reframes it from a minor social habit into a genuine health factor. At younger ages, the immune buffer is broad, and the consequences of drinking are harder to see. At older ages, the buffer is thin, so every additional stress makes itself felt. In this way, the habit becomes not just a personal choice, but a system-wide influence on health. Reducing that stress, even modestly, keeps the body better prepared for the everyday exposures it faces. When seen clearly, the message is not about alarm, but about prevention. Every small step toward lowering alcohol use strengthens the shield that protects against sickness. And as these adjustments gather momentum, they not only reduce vulnerability, but also preserve the freedom to stay engaged in life. That freedom includes physical health, but it also depends on relationships and social ties, the very connections that sustain well-being in later years. And this is where alcohol carries another, less visible cost. Rather than bringing people closer, it can quietly deepen isolation. More drinking, less connecting. Wait, doesn't alcohol make socializing easier? That's the assumption many people carry, that a drink brings friends closer, loosens conversation, and smooths over silence. Yet in later years, the reality often flips. What starts as a tool for connection can slowly become a reason to stay in. Alcohol marketed as a social lubricant may, in practice, erode the very connections it promises to build. The cultural picture reinforces that expectation. Films and commercials show clinking glasses, group laughter, and dinner tables lit with cheer. Retirement communities schedule happy hours as part of their calendars, fostering the sense that alcohol is the center of the group experience. At first, the promise feels true. A shared drink seems to encourage camaraderie. But for seniors, the longer-term picture shifts. Alcohol doesn't always sustain connection. It often carves slowly into it. With time, steady drinking can make leaving the house feel more taxing, turn once social events into skipped evenings, and redirect attention towards solitude rather than company. Consider a familiar routine. A card night every Thursday with neighbors, snacks, conversation, and lighthearted competition. One week, someone decides not to go, convincing themselves that pouring a drink at home feels just as relaxing. The next week, the same choice feels even easier. Why make the effort when the glass is already here? A subtle pattern takes root. Over months, what began as group laughter turns into predictable evenings alone. The shift isn't sudden, but by the time it becomes clear, social momentum has already faded. There are reasons this pattern unfolds so easily. Physically, alcohol increases fatigue, leaving older adults less inclined to get dressed or travel, even short distances, for gatherings. It alters mood-regulating pathways, raising the likelihood of waking up subdued and uninterested the next day. The small lift felt initially gives way to a heavier drop in motivation. For someone already facing barriers like joint pain, reduced driving comfort, or mild depression, that drop can decide the difference between going out to connect or staying in alone. Over weeks, the balance tilts toward withdrawal, even as they remind themselves that the drink should be helping. This shift shows up in relationships as well. Families notice when evening routines revolve around the bottle. Adult children may shorten visits if conversations feel dampened by alcohol. Friends who don't drink may invite less often, sensing mismatched expectations around gatherings. What begins as an individual decision shapes outward ripples, quietly narrowing social circles. To the person drinking, it can feel as though others are drifting away, when in reality the habit is the factor creating gradual distance. The broader trend since 2020 has magnified this. Seniors who already experienced disrupted social routines during the pandemic sometimes leaned harder on alcohol for comfort. That increased use. However, often overlapped with rising reports of loneliness and depression in older adults. Survey results repeatedly show that those who drink more also tend to report less social activity and more emotional isolation. It is not always a conscious choice to detach. Rather, the fatigue, mood shifts, and reduced invitations that follow alcohol use build towards separation. This makes the paradox clearer. The same drink that feels like a social starter can, over time, pull people into quieter, more solitary patterns. It may begin with cheerful happy hours and shared meals, but the long-term trajectory is often evenings spent alone, declining invitations, and noticing fewer regular contacts. When connection shrinks, seniors lose not just companionship, but the health protections that come with staying engaged. Social bonds are directly tied to lower mortality risk, better emotional health, and slower decline in later years. Alcohol moves that equation backwards, promoting fatigue, withdrawal, and the very loneliness it seems poised to ease. The significance lies in the consequences. Loneliness and isolation in older adults aren't just matters of mood. Studies consistently show that isolation carries risks on par with smoking or obesity, increasing the likelihood of early mortality. Depression symptoms climb higher, anxiety grows sharper, and physical health declines faster when ties to others weaken. Alcohol compounds all three. It not only alters the brain biologically in ways that worsen depression and anxiety, but also erases energy to re-engage, amplifying the cycle of disconnection. Contrast this with alternative rituals that pull people together without leaving them exhausted the next day. Senior exercise groups often double as both fitness and connection, giving participants encouragement along with physical benefit. Coffee or tea circles provide structure and conversation while leaving next day energy intact. Even something as simple as sparkling water in a fancy glass during evening group time can keep the ritual while removing the fatigue. These alternatives don't just preserve mood and clarity, they reinforce the consistency of community over time. Participants leave refreshed, strengthening bonds rather than weakening them. The difference is measurable. Where alcohol leaves people tired and less likely to come back, alternatives encourage return. Where alcohol narrows social opportunity over time, shared routines without it expand them. Choosing these patterns doesn't mean losing enjoyment. It means extending both enjoyment and independence. Seniors who anchor their routines in company rather than in the bottle safeguard a resource that supports health more than nearly any supplement, authentic relationships. That's why redefining happy hour matters. It was never the drink alone that made people feel included. It was the conversation across the table and the memory of shared time afterward. Alcohol mimics this briefly but erodes it long term. A non-alcoholic ritual, by contrast, sustains community without the silent cost. The adjustment doesn't need to be radical. Test a single swap for a month. Replace one weekly glass with tea, sparkling water, or a group walk. Watch whether energy, attendance, and conversation shift. The experiment is light in effort, but heavy in payoff, because the evidence says connection thrives easier that way. If you've noticed drinking taking the place of outings, one small step matters. Invite a friend to an alcohol-free activity this week and see what changes. Sometimes the most effective way to restore ties is not grand, but simple. Replace the glass with company itself. Of course, some people will ask a familiar question. Isn't there still something good in that daily glass, especially when it comes to health? That belief has lingered for decades, often built around one specific idea. And it's often the very first defense people give when the risks of alcohol in later life are raised. What about the benefits of a glass of wine? When the subject of alcohol in seniors comes up, the idea of red wine being good for the heart almost always enters the conversation. For decades, Headlines echoed the claim that a small, regular glass could protect cardiovascular health. The story was simple. Observational studies had linked moderate wine consumption to slightly higher HDL cholesterol, sometimes called good cholesterol, and to lower rates of heart disease in certain groups. Wine's plant compound resveratrol was spotlighted as a protective ingredient, while European cultural patterns, what journalists often called the French paradox, were used as anecdotal proof. By the 1990s, the message had spread so widely that many considered it reliable advice rather than tentative science. The complication is that those early studies weren't performed with older adults in mind. In fact, most of the participants were middle-aged, averaging their 30s through 50s with health profiles and risks that look very different from those of someone in their 70s or 80s. What also became clear over time was that observational studies often blurred cause and effect. People who drank lightly often had other protective factors: higher socioeconomic status, better overall diet, and more regular medical care. The wine itself may not have been the protective agent. It may have simply appeared alongside other habits that encouraged health. Once researchers corrected for these differences, the protective effect of wine largely faded. Take the hypothetical example of a 75-year-old who ends dinner each night with a large pour of red wine, confident that he's following good advice handed down decades ago. He'll tell his family that his doctor once said it was good for the heart, presenting the ritual as sound health maintenance. But medical guidance in 2025 no longer supports this interpretation. More recent analyses show that any small cardiovascular benefit apparent in younger adults is outweighed by severe downsides for older adults, including cancer, frailty, and cognitive decline. For seniors, the balance shifts firmly into the negative, turning what once seemed like friendly advice into a liability. This shift is grounded in biology. Past 65, alcohol lingers in the bloodstream longer because metabolism slows and liver enzymes work less efficiently. A single drink results in higher blood alcohol concentration than it would have in middle age. Meanwhile, the health stakes rise higher with each year: weaker bone density, greater fall risk, more vulnerable immune function, and heightened susceptibility to cancer. So even if HDL cholesterol bumps up slightly, that modest change is no match for the very real hazards. For seniors, the question isn't whether wine offers some effect. The question is whether that effect is remotely worth the price. Evidence increasingly says no. Many people hold on to the idea that light drinking is safe or even protective, but research in recent years has undercut that belief too. Studies reveal that even relatively low alcohol intake is associated with increased risk of certain cancers, particularly breast and gastrointestinal cancers. Rates of fall-related injuries and fractures are also higher in older adults who drink, even casually, because balance and bone strength are already compromised. Risk of dementia rises with each additional unit of alcohol due to its accelerating impact on brain atrophy. These stacked hazards tilt the scale decisively, making the old cardiovascular narrative feel incomplete at best and misleading at worst. The myth of resveratrol deserves its own clarification. While lab studies have shown heart protective effects from resveratrol, the quantities that created changes were far greater than what exists in a glass of wine. You would need hundreds of glasses daily to approach the tested doses, levels that would cause catastrophic harm to the liver, brain, and cardiovascular system. So the romantic idea that sipping wine delivers meaningful resveratrol is not supported. The small amounts present in wine simply do not translate into the laboratory results, making this more of a marketing echo than a medical fact. It helps to think critically about the logic. If wine raises HDL cholesterol modestly, so does modest exercise. A short daily walk has measurable and far stronger effects, not only raising protective cholesterol, but also improving circulation, lowering blood pressure, and boosting mood. A varied diet rich in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains provides antioxidant and anti-inflammatory protection without any of alcohol's risks. Stress management techniques, whether evening relaxation rituals, breathing practices, or social outings, also improve cardiovascular resilience. Framed this way, wine looks less like a tool for health and more like an inefficient, side effect-laden substitute for methods that are safer and stronger. Still, many seniors understandably keep loyalty to habits that once felt validated. It can even become part of identity, a kind of generational marker to say we were told this was good for us. But science moves, and loyalty to past information is not the same as loyalty to health. Today's consensus, shaped by decades of follow-up research, is clear. Alcohol use offers no true protective benefit for seniors. What little signal appeared in earlier data has been thoroughly eroded by stronger analyses correcting those confounders. Modern physicians rarely, if ever, endorse alcohol as beneficial in older age. Instead, they warn of the opposite. The real picture across global health bodies is consistent. Analyses from the World Health Organization, the American Heart Association, and national health agencies conclude that no level of alcohol consumption can be considered beneficial for preventing disease. Put another way, if alcohol provides any apparent small cardiovascular change, it is undone many times over by higher odds of cancer, falls, and impaired cognition. For seniors, where all three risks are already elevated, it is not a balanced trade. It is a decision to increase vulnerability under the illusion of protection. That conclusion is important because it shifts the narrative from nostalgia to practical clarity. Wine is not medicine. It is alcohol, a compound the body treats as a toxin, one that burdens the liver, dulls reflexes, and intensifies other chronic risks. If value is found in drinking, it lies in the enjoyment or ritual, but not in prevention. And that distinction matters because mistaking a preference for a prescription clouds decision-making. Seniors who believe their evening pour is doctor-approved are less likely to examine whether it still fits their health landscape. The essential takeaway is straightforward. For older adults, any potential benefit from alcohol is outweighed by broader risks. Cancer incidence grows higher, fall risk magnifies, cognitive decline accelerates. The myth of cardiovascular protection may have once seemed reasonable, but in 2025 the balance of evidence leaves no doubt. Holding on to wine for health is no longer a justified position. The only reasonable framework is to see it as a choice, one with trade-offs, but not one with proven medical upside. Reaching that understanding doesn't have to mean abandoning every part of the ritual. It means separating the idea of healthy from the act itself. Where health is concerned, wine is not an ally. And when the real goal is protecting heart function, strength, and independence, there are far more effective tools within reach, tools that build without subtracting. Recognizing this distinction is the first step toward placing alcohol back where it belongs, not as a prescription, but as a conscious choice with risks attached. The real question now, and the one on people's minds, is how that choice should look moving forward. Seniors who enjoy their glass may want to know if this means banning drinks altogether, or if there is a way to manage habits without pretending they are health insurance. That's the tension where the discussion naturally turns next. The balance point, what seniors can do instead. Clear health advice about alcohol at older ages is often hard to pin down, but there are some consistent guidelines worth knowing. For healthy older adults, several medical organizations suggest keeping intake under about 7 drinks per week, with no more than 3 drinks on any single day. These limits aren't universal rules, but they give you a starting point to discuss with your own clinician who can consider your medications, health conditions, and lifestyle before giving personal advice. Using those numbers as a reference point instead of treating alcohol as limitless helps put boundaries in place and makes drinking a deliberate decision rather than a default one. Lifestyle at this stage is about balance, not strict prohibition. Some people over 65 may happily skip alcohol and never look back. Others may enjoy the ritual of pouring a drink at the end of the week or celebrating with company, and eliminating it entirely might feel unnecessary. What matters most is seeing alcohol through a clearer lens, a choice that carries costs alongside the moments it appears to add. The task isn't to erase every trace of habit or culture, but to line up values, health, and routines in ways that support independence over the long term. There are simple, practical approaches that make this possible. First, non-alcoholic swaps give the same sense of ritual without the fallout. Sparkling water with fruit feels festive. Herbal teas like chamomile or valerian promote calm and improve sleep, and kombucha adds tang and fizz while supporting gut health. Second, moderation tactics help shrink impact. Space drinking days apart. Always pair alcohol with meals instead of an empty stomach, and keep track of drinks weekly instead of estimating loosely. Third, medication checks are essential. Write out a full list of prescriptions and bring it to your next appointment specifically to ask if any of them react with alcohol. Each of these steps takes minutes, but can change how safe or unsafe alcohol looks in your daily life. Beyond individual choices, social routines benefit from small experiments. Try hosting one alcohol-free social evening each month, whether it's coffee with friends, an afternoon of board games, or a dinner built around sparkling juices. Afterwards, pay attention to how people sleep, how steady they feel the next day, and what their mood is like compared to nights with alcohol involved. These little trials aren't about proving anything. They're about noticing whether the ritual matters more than the substance inside the glass. Many people discover it's the conversation and the gathering that actually set the tone, not the drink itself. Family traditions can be adjusted the same way. One example is a group that used to have a Friday wine night even after health problems started appearing. They replaced the ritual with an evening tea hour, everyone bringing their favorite mug and blend. The act of gathering, the sound of pouring, and the time spent lingering together all stayed intact. What disappeared was only the alcohol, along with its risks of poor sleep and falls. When families test small shifts like this, they usually learn the real reward was never in the bottle but in the shared moment. Independence should always be the measure for older adults deciding how much alcohol to keep in their lives. Walking without help, remembering friends' names, feeling confident on stairs. These are the freedoms alcohol quietly steals long before someone notices. Reframing each choice in terms of independence changes perspective. The drink that looks like quick relaxation becomes more clearly a potential trade for something much more valuable. Whenever you weigh short comfort against long-term freedom, the latter almost always wins when seen clearly. Practicality also means defining what moderation actually looks like. It isn't stretching the definition to fit whatever amount someone feels comfortable justifying. It means setting boundaries that the body can realistically handle at this age. Staying within suggested limits, avoiding alcohol if balance issues are already a concern, and being willing to skip drinking entirely when medications, illness, or poor sleep make alcohol harmful. That is what effective moderation looks like. It's not perfection, it's aligning choices with your current health rather than with habits built decades earlier. Routines that bring joy don't need alcohol to stay meaningful. Book clubs, walking groups, crafting classes, volunteer work, or travel meetups create energy and connection at any age. Holding a coffee, a glass of tea, or flavored sparkling water in your hand during those events feels every bit as social as sipping wine, without paying the cost later. At its best, alcohol was never the source of companionship. It was just the prop. Connection, laughter, and support carry far more weight, and they last longer than any glass. It's also important to think about honesty with healthcare providers. Many seniors omit alcohol use from conversations, assuming their intake is normal or insignificant. Yet even small amounts paired with the wrong prescriptions can cause major problems. Being open about how often you drink, when, and how much gives your doctor or pharmacist the information they need to keep you safe. If emergencies happen, it means your care team knows the full picture instead of guessing at hidden variables. Transparency doesn't take anything away. It adds security in moments when seconds matter. Framing alcohol as a choice rather than as a harmless tradition is the shift that empowers older adults most. When that perspective sets in, deciding to drink occasionally feels like exercising control rather than ignoring risks. Deciding not to drink feels like protecting independence rather than losing pleasure. Both outcomes become active decisions rooted in knowledge. And that difference, moving from passive habit to conscious choice, is what allows seniors to balance health and enjoyment while keeping agency firmly in their own hands. These strategies don't erase every possible risk, but they do tilt the scale in your favor. They protect clarity, stability, and strength while still leaving space for fun and connection. They give you the power to keep the parts of ritual that bring comfort, while discarding the parts that undercut daily life. And ultimately, they bring the focus back where it belongs, protecting years of independence and health that alcohol can so easily erode. This is the balance point. It's not about perfection, and it's not about panic. It's about building a toolkit that makes your choices deliberate and your routines supportive of your well-being. Once you have that toolkit, what alcohol once gave you no longer feels irreplaceable. And when the trade-offs are this clear, the real question is simple. Why give away health and freedom for short-term comfort when stronger options to preserve your independence are already on the table? Because in the end, protecting independence isn't abstract. It has direct, everyday effects. How long you stay active, how often you see friends, how quickly you recover when life throws setbacks your way. Alcohol can shorten that span quietly, but it doesn't have to. The choices you make now decide whether strength, memory, and connection keep carrying forward, or whether they begin slipping earlier than they should. And that recognition leads directly to the final lesson that must be underscored before this conversation closes. Alcohol after 65 carries far greater weight than most people realize, affecting balance, brain health, sleep, bones, immunity, and even social life. The key takeaway is that every drink has trade-offs, and seeing those clearly puts choice back in your hands. A practical first step is simple. Write down all your medications and ask your clinician if any alcohol is safe for you. Then, this week, try one alcohol-free social swap, tea with a friend, sparkling water at dinner, or another ritual that adds connection without the risks. If this helped you, like the video, share a tip in the comments, and subscribe for clear, research-based aging insights.